Hello there, and welcome to another of Andre's Artist Profiles. And today is a very special day for me. It's the 70th birthday of Roberta Joan Anderson. Well, anyway, that's the birth name of this artist, Joni Mitchell. She was one of the most, and is still one of the most, enigmatic and often musically provocative of the Laurel Canyon singer-songwriters of the late 60s and early 70s. And certainly, whatever else said about her, by all measures, the most musically explorative. Now, there are some Joni Mitchell albums that I don't have. She has an enormous body of work, especially recently, that I simply haven't acquired because maybe they're just not quite my cup of tea. And there's a few things in the 70s that are out of print that I don't have either. But I have a good deal of the important music she did, and that's what I'm discussing here. This is Joni Mitchell's first record from 1968. It was produced by David Crosby. Very simple folk-oriented effort called Song to a Seagull. There's the back of that album. You can see Joni Mitchell in the middle there. There's the inside of the CD. It's kind of the reprise CD reprint label. Alright, this next album is called Clouds. One of the things I like about Joni Mitchell so much is that she's a painter, in addition to being a musician, and she painted this cover, self-portrait of herself. And this album is called Clouds. The songs on these first two albums were songs that, actually her first several albums were songs that she had been doing since the mid to late 60s. But we're just getting ready to record them at this point. Of course, the biggest songs on this album would have been Chelsea Morning, Both Sides Now. I mean, those songs have actually become standards. This is very much a standards album, for Joni Mitchell. Let me see if there's anything interesting on the inside. No, it's just kind of the same thing, so... Anyway, this next album, this represents the first Joni Mitchell I ever heard. There's a beautifully poetic coming-of-age folk song on this called The Circle Game. And it's the first Joni Mitchell song I ever heard. And I'm very proud to wax sentimental about it. This is probably the first and one of the few songs that have actually brought a tear to my eye. Now, this album is another collection of standards. Big Yellow Taxi is on this album. Circle Game, which I just mentioned. Woodstock. This is actually one of her most famous albums and one of her finest from 1970. Clouds being from 1969. Now, this album was a little bit different for Joni Mitchell. I believe this album represented a number of newer compositions, and it's called Blue. It came out in 1971. The entire female singer-songwriter movement and many singer-songwriters of every gender and race possible have cited this as a massively influential album on their music and the way they conceptualize songwriting. And I mean, this is an amazing album. I don't think it really had necessarily a huge breakout hit single, but it was a very, very creatively successful album for her and has become one of her iconic releases. Blue. The next album she did was called For the Roses. At this point, she was doing a lot of hanging around the Laurel Canyon musicians, and she was very involved with David Geffen at that particular time. And this album actually had a hit, kind of a country rock song called You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio. Kind of meant somewhat in jest. But this began the beginning of Joni Mitchell's kind of commercial, breakthrough, as it were, which came in 1974 when she started recording with Tom Scott and the LA Express for this album, Court and Spark. This is kind of her big commercial breakthrough album. And, of course, Help Me was her big breakout hit. Free Man in Paris is on this album. Raised on Robbery. Yeah, this is another collection of standards in which Joni Mitchell reinvented herself and started to get more into jazz. Now, my father has her album Hissing of Summer Lawns, which I don't have. The artist currently known as Prince. This is the album that the first album he loved all the way through, but I'll only talk a little bit about that. That album actually has a lot of heavy Afro jazz elements to it. That's all I'm going to say. But anyway, the next album after Hissing of Summer Lawns in 1975, which didn't do well at all, was Hijira from 1976. Kind of a concept album about observations on the road. Here's the inside cover for that album. Sorry, the CD fell out. Anyway, this album has Coyote, Amelia. You know, this is where she was working very heavily with Jaco Pastorius and really getting into the jazzier aspect of her sound. But this is my first Joni Mitchell album I ever bought on CD, so I really like that one. This album, that, by the way, is Joni Mitchell, not in blackface, but actually from a movie that never got produced. That's a whole other story. Both of these are Joni Mitchell, obviously. That's Joni Mitchell. Anyway, this is called Don Juan's Reckless Daughter. This album basically follows a similar pattern to Hijira, except that the songs are elongated, and she really goes for the jazz on this one. It's not a favorite of a lot of critics, but it should be. This is a magnificent album, and really beautiful. You know, there's the back of it. I think there's some stuff if you open it up, too. There's some pictures if I can take it out. There we go. Muslims, it says. Anyway. The next album I have, she had an album out called Mingus in 1979, which she recorded Mingus's later compositions before his passing. But the next studio album I have by her is 1982's While Things Run Fast, which was very much of a new wave and progressive rock influenced album, and it was sort of her introduction to the new, sound of the 80s. Again, she painted that cover. I don't know how well it was received, but, it did all right. I mean, it did what it was supposed to do, bring Joni Mitchell into the 80s. Interestingly enough, creatively, it's one of my favorite albums by her. It's just different from what she'd done before. She continued on that same path with this album called Dog Eat Dog. This is a very social and political-oriented album from 1985. Thomas Dolby is on it, Rod Steiger appearance on this particular album. Again, it's a very underrated. We'll give this flack because it tracks like the Three Great Stimulants,
where she, in the 80s, I think there was a little credibility war happening, that maybe all that stuff, but that's not important. Joni Mitchell is who she is. The next album, Chalk Mark in a Rainstorm, was produced by the same people that did. And there's another album that comes after I don't have. But the next is this album, Turbulent Indigo, from 1984. 1994, sorry. It's a little bit of a darker on it called Sex Kills. She painted herself very much in the style of Van album. There's kind of a melancholia to it. As far as melancholia was concerned, the thing. Anyway, so that's what Joni Mitchell. And, my collection of Joni Mitchell, music will probably, as time goes, some albums like, the live album from 1980, Shadows and Light, which I would very much like to have, and some of her more recent. That's going to be a matter of time. But anyway, that's what I have for Joel. So, 70th, and, if we don't from you, you've been Joni Mitchell hired for a number of years. We certainly have a good body of work from her to remember. Happy birthday. See you next time.